Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever and wherever you're watching or listening. This is the Stochastic NHL DFS Strategy Show, and I am your host for today, Michael Clifford, aka Slim Cliffy. Obviously, still a few different things around the site and around the show. Josh is still dealing with some family stuff, so he's not on today. Obviously, the site isn't quite back up to where it was, though we do have top stacks and projections available on the data hub. So head on over to, if you're a Stochastic subscriber, head on over to stochastic.com and head on over to the data hub because everything is up there ready to go. 10-game slate ahead of us here tonight. Just touch on the 5-game slate last night briefly. Florida went into Tampa Bay and laid down a pretty good beating. Ottawa, I guess, after kind of blowing a game a few days ago, scored late to tie it up against Winnipeg and then scored again in overtime to win 3-2. Nice pass by Tim Stutz. I think Stutz had 3 assists last night. He's having a really good season. Stars took care of business at home against Los Angeles. Of course, we do have to shout out our very own Gotta Get This Win. He certainly did have a win last night. 10K with Florida and Dallas stacks, had Casey DeSmith in net. Really good night from him. Certainly do love to see it. Hopefully he can have another big night here tonight because it is a big night on DraftKings. So shout out, got to get this win for his night last night. Tonight is a big night over on DraftKings. We do have the barn burner. If anybody has won tickets or is just buying straight in, obviously it's the big 555 that DraftKings has going. Only 100. I'm looking now, 165 spots left out of the 800, so might fill. 100K up top, at least 5 figures if you finish in the top 4. So pretty big deal. We only get a handful of these every year, so got to take advantage while we can. Probably shouldn't waste too much time because this is a fairly large slate with 10 games, lots of important pieces, lots of important news. So we're just going to jump right into it. Anaheim Ducks played last night, won last night in New York. They're going into Columbus tonight. Anaheim has a 2.9 total. Columbus has a 3.6. I imagine these implied goal totals I took from Pinnacle, doing the math myself. So as always, be careful of my math. They're also done this morning, probably about 4 hours ago. So if anything's changed since then, so be it. But Anaheim 2.9 total, Columbus 3.6. Lucas Dostal went for Anaheim last night. I imagine it's going to be Ville Husso tonight then. Jet Greaves already confirmed in net for Columbus. Again, Columbus reuniting their top line, Dmitry Voronkov, Adam Fantilli with Kirill Marchenko. Second line of Boone Jenner, Sean Monahan, Yegor Chinnikov. Anaheim obviously had some different lineup configurations last night. They had Leo Carlson playing with Cutter Gauthier and Alex Killorn, Mason McTavish, Beckett Seneca, and Chris Kreider on what I guess would be the second line, but with Granlund, Vetrano, and Troy Terry down on the third line. I'd call the Leo Carlson line the top line, and the other ones 2A and 2B, kind of like what Carolina does with the Stahl and Stankoven lines. Either way, the Columbus top line is quite the interesting line here tonight because Columbus won. Voronkov, Fantilli, Marchenko, 15,900. I was loaded up the data into Excel. Total ownership percentage projected between the three of them is 77.9%. There's no other mid-price line higher than 31.2%. That's Edmonton 2. So basically, the next 3 lines have roughly the same ownership total expected as Columbus 1. So Columbus 1 is going to be very chalky. The projected fantasy points per $1,000 at 2.24, also the highest of any of the mid-price lines. That Columbus line is going to be very chalky here tonight, but they've also been very good. I was looking just over the last 15 games to see if how they've been doing lately. Their last 120 minutes, 61 shot attempts, 3 expected goals, playing about 44-45% of the time with Zach Werenski, all on the top power play unit. They also get a lot of depth matchups. So they might not see a ton of Jackson Lacombe here tonight, might not see a ton of Leo Carlsson. It is a really good spot for Columbus, especially with Anaheim back-to-back on the road. Columbus with a huge total, very moderately priced. Like you can straight up add in Zach Werenski to that stack. And you're still looking at a stack under 25K, which is full power play one, or nearly full power play one. At least it's perfectly correlated top line with the top power play defenseman. So, Columbus one is in a great spot. It's just a matter if you want to play them with all that ownership. Their individual ownership, Voronkov at the low end at 22%, Fantilli at the high end at 30%. These guys are going to be chalky. But it is a 10-game slate, plenty of spots to get different elsewhere. It's just a matter if you want to play a line that, might come in 20 to 25% owned on a slate like this. I think they're perfectly acceptable to play, but you guys make your own lineups here. If you want to dip down to Columbus too, that Jenner, Monahan, Chinnikov line, of the filler lines, they don't have a terrible projection. At least fantasy points per dollar, about the middle, 1.86 per $1,000 at only 11,300. Fairly chalky though. So you're not even getting a high fantasy points per 1,000 for them. And they look to be like the second chalkiest filler line here tonight, other than the Islanders, and we'll get to them later. I don't really like playing super chalky filler lines. Personally, like I'd rather just play the chalky top line, but they're both firmly in play. I would lean to Columbus one. You do you though. The question is what to do on the Anaheim side, because this is a pretty good matchup for the Ducks, but with all their line changes of late, like Leo Carlsson, if Anaheim keeps with the lineups that they had last night, Leo Carlsson is going to probably be the only guy on his line on the top power play unit. If you go down to this, the quote second line, Chris Kreider will also be the only guy on his line on the top power play unit. Like breaking up their lines has also broken up the power play correlation. Now, Leo Carlsson, Cutter Gauthier, in over 115 minutes together this season. 71 shot attempts, 5.1 goals per 60, shooting about 14%, which is a little high, but even shooting like 10%, and they would still have an extremely high scoring rate, at about 3.4, 3.5 per 60 minutes. Alex Killorn, I think, is kind of an underrated player. He's a good digger. I don't mind playing Anaheim one here tonight. They're not super expensive. I'll bring up the sheet again real quick. Anaheim won 16,400, 1.7 fantasy points per 1,000. Coming in with low ownership, Alex Killorn about 1.5%. Cutter Gauthier at the high end at about 3%. Like, I'm not super concerned about any of the matchups on the Columbus side. What really sucks is that they just don't have that much correlation. Honestly, they're probably my favorite line here tonight at 16,400. I think they're a nice pivot away from Columbus one if you don't want to play that super chalk. But for me, it goes Columbus one, Anaheim one, Columbus two in this game. I think Anaheim 3 would be in play, the Granlund, Terry, Vetrano line, just because you do get Granlund and Terry on the top power play unit. But I think that'd be more like an MME thing. I typically, even if it's a 2B line, I typically don't dip down that far when we have 20 teams to choose from. All right, moving along. Utah 3.0 total going into Boston. Boston also having a 3.0 total. Looks like Vitek Vanacek going to get the start for Utah. Jeremy Swayman confirmed in net for Boston. Boston running back. The same lines that they had in their last game. So that means Elias Lindholm with David Pastrnak and Morgan Geekie, Marat Husnutinov next to Pavel Zacha and Casey Middlestat. This is a Boston one game. They are relatively expensive at 18,800. Not a ton of ownership. David Pastrnak, his ownership looks like to be about 5% or so. Lindholm and Geeky between 2 and 4%. So this is not going to be a highly owned line. The fantasy points per thousand, for a line that expensive at 1.73 actually isn't that bad. It's not a terrible matchup going up against Vanacek in Utah. The Boston top line is currently constructed 2.6 expected goals, 57 shot attempts per 60. I think what might kind of work against them is that the Lindholm Geeky Pasternak line usually doesn't take shutdown matchups, which means they won't see the Peterka Keller line. And that line's actually been fairly poor defensively for Utah. So that's actually something that might kind of work against them here. Funny enough, Elias Lindholm has 11 points in his last 10 games. I believe 10 of those are assists. He has 11 shots in his last 10 games as well. So he has as many shots as he does points. At 18,800, I do think they're very playable here. I would probably rather play Boston than Utah here tonight, simply because of the goaltending matchup. Jeremy Swayman has straight up been, one of the best goalies in the NHL this season. Like, by goals saved above expected, he's fourth in the league at nearly 1 goal saved above expected per game. I believe it's 20 in 21 games. Only Logan Thompson, Ilya Sorokin, and Spencer Knight ahead of him. Safe to say the Utah goalies haven't been anywhere close to that. Vitek Vanacek, 2.3 in 9 games. So about a third of the rate of Jeremy Swayman. It is a much tougher matchup for Utah than it is for Boston. They do have the same total here. I have no problem playing Boston. I just think, if you're going to play, a line that's 18,800, you might just want to kind of pay up a little bit more and go play Edmonton, or, we'll get to Minnesota and Colorado. Like, at that point, I'd probably just rather dip down to a couple lines in the 16 to 17K range, or just pay up for a really expensive line and then add in a filler rather than just play them at 18,800. Like, David Pasternak, always fine as a one-off. Utah typically doesn't take a ton of penalties. Boston certainly isn't drawing a lot of power plays. Boston, over the last 5 weeks, only drawing 2.3 power play opportunities per game. It's the third lowest rate in the league. So without a ton of power play time, and I think some better options elsewhere, I'm kind of out on Boston. As far as Utah goes, like, I do think they're playable. That Utah top line with Peterka, Keller, and Schmaltz, 3.2 expected goals for, 65 shot attempts per 60, priced at 18,700, 1.92 fantasy points per $1,000. So second most of any of the expensive lines here. Obviously, probably going to carry double-digit ownership at the low end, 10, 11%, at the high end, maybe 15% or so. Boston does take a ton of penalties, 3.6 times shorthanded per game over the last 3.5, times shorthanded per game over the last 5 weeks. It's the highest rate in the league. They are the highest rate over the course of the season. Utah's power play really hasn't been that great, though. I'm fine with Utah 1. Given that Boston 1 is coming in at a fraction of the ownership, like literally 1/3 the ownership, I'd probably rather just go play Boston over Utah. So where I don't really want to play Boston either. I think this game is kind of like more MME-ish than single entry for me. If I had to pick one or the other, I would go to Boston 1, but I don't see myself getting to either side in this matchup here tonight. All right, moving along. New York Islanders, 2.7 total. They're going into Detroit. The Detroit Red Wings have a 3.3 total. Looks like Ilya Sorokin going to be starting for the Islanders, with John Gibson going for the Detroit Red Wings. Obviously, Bo Horvat is still out for the Islanders. Kyle Palmieri has been hurt. And Matt Barzal is apparently a game-time decision. Now, they made it seem like he's going to play tonight. It was one of those, putting Siplikov in his spot in the morning skate. They don't think it's anything too serious. They're optimistic he'll play tonight. But listen, if Matt Barzal is out, and they're already without Horvat and Palmieri, that's basically the entire top line out. And they don't have, like after that, it's like JG Pajot at center. Maybe Emil Heineman might play some center. Like they just really don't have anything. So like this all hinges on Matt Barzal playing. Even if Barzal is playing, I really don't have a ton of interest in the Islanders. I was looking at Matt Barzal and Jonathan Drouin, 110 minutes together this season without Bo Horvat or Kyle Palmieri or Anders Lee on their line. 54 shot attempts for, 53 against per 60. Barzal's under 2 shots per game in his last 10. They're going to, even if Barzal's in, they're going to see a boatload of that Seider Edmondson pairing, which is absolute death at 5-on-5. Red Wings aren't taking a ton of penalties, 2.6 times shorthanded per game over the last 5 weeks. It's bottom 10 in the league, or, top 10, depending how you want to look at it. Certainly fewer than league average. So, for me, even if Barzal's in, the fact that they're going to see so much of the Seider Edmondson pairing, it kind of gets me away from the Islanders. So I don't really have a ton of interest in the Islanders forwards here tonight, with or without Barzal. If Horvat was in and then all of a sudden, Edmondson and Seider can only be matched up against one line or the other, then maybe we're talking. But where Barzal, even if he plays, is going to be up against one of the toughest defensive matchups in the NHL, I'm just out. On the Islanders, the question is what to do with Detroit, because Patrick Kane, he's going to be out for tonight. It looks like John Leonard may be starting on the second line for the Red Wings, though, of course, we're going to have to see what it looks like in warmups. John Leonard, that's a name that Obi-Wan Kenobi voice I've not heard in a long time. John Leonard, once upon a time seemed like he was going to be a decent prospect for the Sharks, but he's kind of bounced around the NHL and the AHL over the last few years. I don't think he'd be anything special on that second line. This is a game where if I play anything, it's the Detroit top line. Their last 10 games, 3.1 expected goals per 60. They're playing 55% of the ice time at home with Moritz Seider. So getting a ton of time with the Detroit top pair. That Detroit top line isn't that expensive here tonight. I'll bring up the sheet again. Detroit won 16,900, 1.75 fantasy points per thousand, nearly 30 total fantasy points combined between them. Now, facing Ilya Sorokin is a big problem. He's been obviously basically lights out since the first couple weeks of the season. As I mentioned earlier, second in the NHL in goals saved above expected this season. Also, something about the Red Wings power play. Obviously, Patrick Kane not in the lineup here tonight. Over the last 2 years, when Patrick Kane is not on the top power play unit, their shot attempt rate goes down about 25%. And their expected goals for rate goes down about 30%. It is a massive, massive drop off. He obviously is a key cog of that top power play unit. The Islanders' penalty kill is fairly poor. They really do rely on Sorokin to bail them out. So maybe Detroit can still kind of do something here with James Van Riemsdyk taking Patrick Kane's spot on the power play. But I do think, if Patrick Kane was in, I would be a lot more excited about using Detroit here in a matchup where the Islanders could be missing so many key forwards. Without him, it changes things. I think considering Detroit won is under 17K, if you look at the ownership, they're all projected between 3 and 4%, Finney, Raymond, and Larkin. I think they're perfectly playable here tonight. They're not a big target of mine. But if you want to get away from some of the heavier owned mid-price lines, Columbus, like we talked about earlier, Edmonton, we'll get to Calgary in a little bit. There are some mid-price lines that will carry some heavy ownership. If you want to get away from that, I think Detroit one is fine. It's basically the only thing that I have any real interest in this game, because I'm not playing the second line without Patrick Kane there, because he's not going to be on the power, because obviously he won't be on the power play. Definitely no interest in anything on the Islanders side, because, pardon me, even if Matt Barzal is in, he's going to be going up against that Seider Edmondson pairing, and that is just absolute death. All right. Let's move this along. Anybody? Oh, hold on. Anyone playing CBJ3? I do think Columbus 3 is fine as a filler. Here's something to note that I noticed earlier is that when Columbus is at home, Charlie Coyle plays about 55% of his ice time with Zach Werenski, because that Columbus third line and the Werenski pair are often used in a shutdown matchup, right? So I do think, like, if you want to do, like, a Coyle Sillinger 2-man or a Coyle Miles Wood 2-man, or, like, a 2-man of like Coyle and Wood, and then add Zach Werenski on the blue line. Like, if you want to use Werenski but not pay up for Columbus 1, like, I do think that's fine. Especially where that Columbus quote third line, those guys get pretty good minutes. You know what I mean? Just over Columbus's last 5 games alone, Charlie Coyle playing nearly 18 minutes a game, Cole Sillinger up towards 16 minutes a game. So, like, these guys get decent minutes for a cheap price. And like I said, you can throw Zach Werenski on the blue line with them. I don't mind them if you want to use them as a filler, to be honest. So, I don't think I'll be playing them, but I imagine some people in here will be, Jamie. All right, let's move this along. We have the Philadelphia Flyers with Dan Vladar starting in net. They're going into Montreal. The Montreal Canadiens are going to be going with Jacob Fowler in net. Philly, when I did this morning, had a 2.4 total. Montreal a 3.1. I think that's gone the other way a little bit, but Philly still would be around, like, maybe a 2.6 total, with Montreal at around 2.9. So, this is a game with a 5.5 total. I'm not expecting a ton of goals here, but, we have seen the Montreal goaltending kind of fall apart. Jacob Fowler, he looked really good in his first game. He looked fine in his second game. I just didn't think the team around him played that well. As it is, he's given up 7 goals in 2 starts. So, like, it's not like this is an impossible situation for Philly. Philly is making one small lineup change. They're moving Matvei Michkov down to what I guess is the third line with Noah Cates and Bobby Brink. Might be kind of like a 2B, 2A situation to the Couturier Tippett Carl Grundstrom line, but do make a note of that. Obviously, Dvorak, Konechny, and Zegras is staying as is. That Zegras line, 56 shot attempts, 3.6 expected goals for per 60 over the last nearly 80 minutes together. Even Christian Dvorak has 13 points in his last 15 games. Now, it kind of sucks that the Flyers have split up their power play a bit. So, Travis Konechny's on one unit, Trevor Zegras is on another, Christian Dvorak is on neither. Montreal does take their fair share of penalties. The penalty kill isn't great, but it's not like the Philly power play is anything special either. In fact, the Philly power play, bottom 3 in the league in goals for per game. So it's one of those, like, is this a good power play matchup for Philly or a good penalty kill matchup for Montreal? Split the difference. Decent matchup for both. That Philadelphia top line, 14,800. Not much ownership coming in on them. Dvorak, Zegras, Konechny, 14,800, about 25.2 total points combined. Konechny projection at about 1% ownership. Zegras at about 1%. Dvorak a little bit higher because he's much cheaper than the others. But not much ownership here. And, whether they go out against the Suzuki line or whether they go out against the Jake Evans line, like, this is a good matchup for that Philadelphia top line. 14,800 with very low ownership. I honestly don't mind them here tonight. They're one of those mid-price stacks you can throw in with another mid-price stack so you can get to your Zach Werenski or Cale Makar or whatever. They've been creating offensive well. There's no 5-on-5 matchup on the Montreal side that bothers me. Montreal's going to be without Mike Matheson, which, I don't know, might help them defensively, but we'll see. I don't mind the Zegras line here. After that, it would be playing one-offs. Like, if you want a one-off Noah Cates because he gets decent minutes, I think that's fine. Certainly one-off Michkov, I think, is fine. One-off Owen Tippett, something like that, I think it's fine. If I stack anything from Philly, it's the top line. They've done well offensively together. They get good minutes, like between like 18 and 20 plus minutes. So a lot of minutes with good offensive 5-on-5 in a good 5-on-5 matchup. I think Philadelphia 1 is firmly in play. After that, like the fact that they put Mitchkov down with Cates and Brink makes me think that those lines aren't going to stay together for very long. So I do worry about them, Carl Grundstrom staying in the top 6 or whatever. I do worry about them changing lines, if they get down 1-0 or 2-0 or something like that. So for me, it would just be the Philadelphia top line. On the Montreal side, as I mentioned on the last show, the Montreal top line with Zach Bolduc got off to a rough start, but they've been better lately. Over the last 110 minutes for the top line, 64 shot attempts, 3.1 expected goals per 60. You get Caulfield and Suzuki on the top power play. Suzuki's been playing like 21 plus minutes a night. Caulfield around 18, Bolduc a little less, maybe like 15 or so. But they've also been getting depth matchups. So, I'm not sure exactly which lines they're going to go out against. I imagine they're going to go out a fair bit against the Cates and Couturier lines. That's actually not a great matchup for Montreal. And I'll also mention, it looks like Rasmus Ristolainen is going to be back for the Flyers here tonight. And as much of a punching bag as Rasmus Ristolainen used to be, he turned it into a pretty good defensive defenseman under under John Tortorella. And it'll only help the Flyers' defensive ability, and it'll kind of move everybody down one spot to where they should be, other than like Travis Sanheim and Cam York probably. It really solidifies the second pair. I don't know. I'm not super in on Montreal 1 here tonight. 16,300. The projection is fine. The points per $1,000 is fine. They're not coming in with a ton of ownership. At the low end, about 3%. At the high end, maybe 5 or 6% for Nick Suzuki. But it's Dan Vladar starting. Montreal, they're below average drawing power play opportunities over the last 5 weeks. They get, Philadelphia gets Ristolainen back. I'm not super keen on stacking the Habs here. If you want a one-off, like Ivan Demidov or something, or two-man like Kapanen or Demidov, like I think that's fine. As far as full stacking anything goes, I'd honestly prefer to full stack the Philadelphia top line than anything on the Montreal side. So I think for me, it would go like Philadelphia 1, and then maybe some one-offs from either side, whether it be Mitchkov or Tippett or Demidov or something like that. The only line I really have any interest in stacking is that Philadelphia top line. All right, moving along. Vancouver Canucks, 2.8 total. They're going into New York to face the Rangers. The Rangers have a 3.2 total. Looks like Thatcher Demko going to be going for Vancouver. Igor Shesterkin went yesterday for New York. Now, they haven't confirmed a goal yet, but I imagine it's going to be Jonathan Quick. Mika Zibanejad probably should be back in the lineup after being healthy scratch yesterday for missing the team meeting. If he is, imagine he's just going back to the top line with Alexis Lafreniere and Artemi Panarin. And, that line is relatively cheap, 17,100. So if they're basically in the same price range as like the Detroit top line that we talked about, the Montreal top line that we just talked about, the Anaheim top line that we talked about earlier. And they've been fine offensively, 2.6 expected goals for, 67 shot attempts per 60. The big news for me is that they're perfectly correlated on the power play. Now, there's two things that are important here. One, Vancouver penalty kill, not very good. The Canucks are taking 3.3 penalties per game over the last 5 weeks. It's the 6th highest rate in the league. Their penalty kill percentage over that span, 77.6%, one of the 10 worst marks. Over the course of the entire season, that Canucks penalty kill, 4th worst in the league. They're giving up 0.91 power play goals against per game. It's the most in the league this year. So it's technically a pretty good power play spot for the Rangers. And that top line is perfectly correlated at 17,100. Here's the problem. The Rangers aren't drawing any power plays. Over the last 5 weeks, the New York Rangers drawing 2.1 power play opportunities per game. It's the lowest rate in the league in that span. For the full season, 2.3 power play opportunities per game. Again, the lowest rate in the league. And if you look at the Rangers power play over the last 2 years without Adam Fox in the lineup, 73 shot attempts, 5.3 expected goals for per 60 minutes. Those are terrible numbers. So you would hope the power play can kind of figure things out with as much talent as they have, but clearly Adam Fox has been a big part of it. It's another one of those situations where like it's a great matchup for the Rangers power play, but the power play itself has not been very good without their number one defenseman. So I really do like the Rangers top line here. They should get plenty of cracks on the power play. Obviously, with no Quinn Hughes in the lineup, that Vancouver defense has taken a big hit. Thatcher Demko, though, he can be a difference maker. Like when he's healthy and playing like he can, he's probably one of the 5 or 6 best goalies in the world. I really do like the Rangers top line here. I know it's a back-to-back, but this Vancouver team, like I said, you could argue has been the worst penalty killing team in the NHL this season by virtue of giving up as many goals as they have. And that Rangers top line, like those top guys, like Zibanejad and Panarin especially will probably play 20 minutes, if not more. So I really do like Rangers 1 here. You want to dip down to Rangers 2. I think they're fine. The Sherry, Trocheck, JT Miller line, 13,700. So they're kind of priced as a filler here. But they are carrying a fair bit of ownership. That's the one problem is that trio, 22.8% combined ownership. Sherry, not a lot, but the other guys, probably double digits or close to it, certainly at least Trocheck. So for me, it's Rangers 1. On the Vancouver side, Brock Besser may or may not be playing here tonight. Still no Elias Pettersson. They lost Quinn Hughes. Listen, I wrote about it at Dauber Hockey, where I write about season-long fantasy hockey. Quinn Hughes boosts the offense by about 17%. That's a lot, especially when you consider that so far this season, the Vancouver Canucks as a whole are 27th in the league in goals per minute. And that's with Quinn Hughes playing, 45% of every game, boosting the offense by 17%. They're still a bottom 6 team in the league. So, I don't know. As far as the forwards go, I don't really have a ton of interest in Vancouver. I know the Rangers, not really the same team without Adam Fox. Vancouver, basically the same without Quinn Hughes. I don't know. For me, I'm not playing a David Kampf top line. The second line, if Brock Besser is in and you want to play a second line of Besser and Jake DeBrusk and Marco Rossi, because they probably will be perfectly correlated on the power play. The Rangers or the Canucks do draw 3.5 power play opportunities per game, over the last 5 weeks. It's the second highest rate in the league behind only San Jose. I do think Rossi, DeBrusk, and Besser are playable. For me, it'd be more like a 20 max or 150 than single entry. For me, this game is about the Rangers top line. All right, let's move things along. This is a dandy. Chicago going into Toronto. When I did the implied goal totals this morning, Chicago was at 1.8 with Toronto at 3.7. Obviously, Chicago, no Connor Bedard. Looks like Kevin Weeks, I think, reported that he has a separated shoulder, so that he might be out for a little while, to say the least. Also, Artem Lupshunov is going to be a healthy scratch for being late for a team meeting, so he's out of the lineup. Matt Grzelcyk looks like he's jumping to the top power play. Frank Nazar, will be jumping to the top line for Chicago with Andre Burakovsky and Tyler Bertuzzi. Now, no, he's not Connor Bedard, but Frank Nazar is probably going to have to play a ton of minutes without Connor Bedard in the lineup. Nazar played almost 20 minutes in a 4-0 loss against Detroit. So he might be a 20-minute guy here. Nazar and Bertuzzi haven't been that great offensively, but like I said, they're going to have to probably play a ton of minutes, perfectly correlated on the power play, going up against a Leafs team that has been, let's say, shaky defensively at best. They've stabilized a little bit. I think the big news for Toronto is that Joseph Woll is back, and he's going to be back in net. Speaking of Thatcher Demko earlier being like a top 5, top 6 goalie when he's healthy and playing well, Joseph Woll is probably like a top 10 goalie in the NHL when he's healthy and playing well. It's not really a great matchup for Chicago because of it, but that Chicago top line with Frank Nazar there, 14,400 with almost no ownership on them, right? 2.1% combined ownership between the three players. All three guys, 0.8, 0.6, 0.7. All three guys coming in under 1% ownership. 14,400 is probably a little expensive for a team without Connor Bedard, but listen, against this Leafs defense, it doesn't take much to pay off 14,400. I do think I do think that they're playable. That's a price range I typically don't play in. But again, they're going to have to get a ton of minutes, and they're perfectly correlated on a power play against a Leafs team whose penalty kill really hasn't been that great. What I will say is I was looking at some of the tracking data from all three zones earlier. Connor Bedard has been responsible for 45% of all of Chicago forwards' entries on the power play this year. Not just the top power play unit, every single forward that has been on the power play, 45%. Maybe Frank Nazar can take over some of that, but that is a hefty chunk to have to make up. I think there's a reason why Chicago has such a low implied goal total. I think the top line is okay, but again, they're another one of those MME things rather than stacking for a single entry, especially with Joseph Woll in net. What to do with the Toronto side is a bit interesting here because obviously they have a massive total here with a 3.7. The top line of Matthews, Nyes, and William Nylander, 37 projected points combined. It's the second highest on the board behind only Colorado. Ownership pretty much in check, between 2 and 6%. And considering there are 4 lines between 21 and 23,000, and not a ton of people run out to play the super expensive lines anyways, I think that ownership sounds about right to me. Now, that line hasn't been great, but they've been good. 60 shot attempts, 3.1 expected goals per 60 at 5-on-5. Perfectly correlated on the power play. Problem is Spencer Knight has been good. The Chicago penalty kill has been pretty good. They don't play massive minutes. Austin Matthews isn't the 4.5 shot per game guy that he used to be. William Nylander's last 15 games, 13.3 shot attempts per 60 at all strengths. To put that into perspective, he was nearly 10 shot attempts per 60 minutes higher just 2 years ago. He hasn't been shooting the puck. Now, he's been scoring a little bit because he's shooting nearly 20%, and I do think that they're trying to lean a bit more into shot quality. But if you're paying up $7,200 for a guy that probably can't get you, or you can't rely on him for a shot bonus, I don't know. I think Toronto 1 is firmly playable here, but where there are 4 lines in that price range, all coming in with relatively the same ownership, I don't think you have to necessarily run out to play Toronto 1 here, especially where they haven't been super high end at 5-on-5. Toronto 2, Tavares and Robertson and Bobby McMahon, I guess they're playable, but for me, if I play anything in this game, it's the Toronto top line and then the Chicago top line. So it'd be Toronto 1, then Chicago 1 for me in this game. I will remind everybody that it is a game with a 5.5 total. Chicago has a pretty low total themselves. So, it's not necessarily a must play by any stretch. All right, let's move it along. Game number 7 on the board. We have a dandy here. Edmonton Oilers 3.7 total going into Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has a 2.8 total. Tristan Jarry starting for Edmonton. Stuart Skinner starting for Pittsburgh. Remember, these two teams made that goalie trade recently, and now the goalies will be facing off against each other again. Like I said, I view both goalies as somewhat equal, so who's starting honestly doesn't really matter for me here. Pittsburgh top line is interesting. Crosby, Rust, and Raquel getting a fair bit of ownership here. You look at the combined ownership between the three players, 33.4%. All three guys between about 11 and 13% ownership. They do have the third highest fantasy point projection for total line points on the board. And of the lines over 17 or over 18K, they have the highest point per $1,000. So I do think it does make sense to play Pittsburgh here. A top line is perfectly correlated on the power play. They're all, last game, no Evgeny Malkin in the lineup, Rickard Raquel back. They all played between like 19 and 21 minutes. They haven't been that great this year with Raquel on the top line. 53 shot attempts, 2 expected goals per 60 at 5-on-5. That's really not that good. The Edmonton top line since Zach Hyman got back, 2.2 expected goals against per 60. So they've been, a lot better than league average defensively. With all that ownership, I don't know. I think it's kind of like Utah for me, where I think I'd rather just dip down and go play a couple mid-price lines, or just pay up an extra, couple grand and go play a line like Edmonton won. The Edmonton top line of McDavid, Hyman, Nugent Hopkins, 21,200, combined ownership of under 12%. 70 shot attempts, 3.6 expected goals per 60. Connor McDavid has 20 points in his last 10 games. The top guys for that top line, for Edmonton, all playing between like 19 and 22 minutes a game. McDavid at the high end at 22 minutes, obviously. The power play, super elite. I really do like Edmonton 1 here. They're not my favorite line in that price range. And we'll get to the line that I might be going with here in a second. But I do like them more than Toronto. So I would be playing Edmonton ahead of Toronto. But of the 4 lines priced over 21K, I have Edmonton 1 at number 3. So playable, I don't think a must play. The Edmonton second line with Draisaitl, Savoie, Podkolzin, I think very, very playable here. They're going to be carrying a fair bit of ownership as well, though. That's kind of the issue here. That Edmonton second line, 31.2% combined ownership at 14,800. I think they're playable for me. Like if I'm playing Edmonton here tonight, I'm playing the top line. Maybe I added Leon Draisaitl with them. But what's interesting to me in this game is the Pittsburgh second line. I bring up the Pittsburgh second line of Kindle, Brazeau, and McGroarty because Rucker McGroarty and Ben Kindle played 65 minutes together, 74 shot attempts, 4.4 expected goals per 60 in that span. Now, they've taken Kindle off the top power play, and as Brandon mentioned, Pittsburgh has had a really good power play in the NHL this season. Overall, the team is at 32.1%, which leads the league. I was looking at Pittsburgh's top power play without Evgeny Malkin over the last couple of years, still 10 goals per 60 at 5-on-4, which is well above average. It would be something like 17, 18% above average. Not elite, like nowhere near like Edmonton or something like that, but still really good. And obviously Edmonton's penalty kill has been fairly poor. So maybe you want to play Pittsburgh 1 because you want to get all that power play 1 exposure. But Kindle McGroarty have shown really well. Now, a lot of that was with Billy Koivunen, and Koivunen's going to be scratched. They're playing with Justin Brazeau instead. But that line for Pittsburgh, certainly not expensive here tonight. Kindle's up to 4,500, so he's, a bit pricey, but McGroarty is under 3K. Brazeau's only 3,300. The line itself is 10,600. I do think they're a filler that you can put in with your, if you're playing Toronto, if you're playing Minnesota or Colorado or something like that. I'm not super concerned about the goaltending matchup. I'm not totally sold on Edmonton's defensive improvements just yet. If you want to play Pittsburgh 1, I say go ahead. I do think they're coming with a little bit too much ownership for me. Like, if I'm going to play a super chalky line, I'll probably just go play Columbus instead. But for me, it goes Edmonton 1, Pittsburgh 2, Pittsburgh 1. I do prefer the Edmonton side. They do have the 3.7 total. The one concern is that the Pittsburgh penalty kill has been pretty good. But, like I said, that Edmonton top line has just been rolling since Zach Hyman came back. So for me, it's like I said, it's Edmonton 1, then Pittsburgh 2, then Pittsburgh 1 out of this game. We should expect some goals, though. $5 super chat from Hypnotoad says, Cliffy and McGillney, my man, thanks for everything. Let's bank, eh? Yeah, let's bank, eh? Thanks a lot for the support. Thanks a lot for the super chat, Toad. Hopefully you can bank, or somebody in the chat can bank, or somebody in the Discord can bank. It'd be nice to see a stochastic avatar at the top here tonight. But thanks again for the super chat. We always do appreciate the support. All right, let's get to our next game. We have the Washington Capitals going into Minnesota to face the Minnesota Wild. Washington with a 2.8 total. Minnesota with a 3.2 total. Looks like Charlie Lindgren going for the Caps. Philip Gustafson going for the Wild. The Wild might be missing half their blue line. Jake Middleton, Jonas Brodin, and Zach Bogosian looks like they're all going to be out here tonight. Two things. One, that is going to hurt the depth, especially with Marcus Johansson injured. They're loading up the top line with Kirill Kaprizov, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Matt Boldy. So now those secondary and tertiary lines aren't going to have, good defensemen to play with them. There's Jared Spurgeon and then, a bunch of guys. The other thing is that probably means a ton of ice time for Quinn Hughes and Brock Faber. Like a lot of ice time. And a lot of ice time with the top line, because they're probably going to have to send out the Eriksson Ek, Boldy, Kaprizov line as a shutdown unit, just because there's nobody else that can actually go out and do the job. So while I do think it hurts the depth of Minnesota quite a bit, I do think this means that Quinn Hughes is going to be playing a lot with that Minnesota top line here tonight. The Minnesota top line, as it is this season, 64 shot attempts, 3.4 expected goals per 60. They've all been playing between 20 and 23 minutes a game of late. Joel Eriksson Ek, nearly 3 shots per game over his last 10. That line priced at $22,400. So they're just a little cheaper than Colorado, more expensive than Toronto. They don't have the highest fantasy points projection. They're fourth behind Colorado, Toronto, and Pittsburgh. What I will say here is that this is a 3.2 total, and this is a Minnesota team missing some depth, right? Like, we said all those defensemen are missing. Marcus Johansson is out. Vinny Hinostroza, Matt Zuccarello, those guys are all out. Like, they're missing basically their entire second line. So this is a team with a 3.2 total that I think has a concentrated top line, or at least for scoring and at least for ice time, plus a lot of ice time with Quinn Hughes. Charlie Lindgren is in net, and we know what that means. We always used to say it's a half goal per game between Charlie Lindgren and Logan Thompson. Just this season alone, the difference between Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren in goals against per game is 0.8. Like, it's a massive, massive difference. And the Washington penalty kill is still not very good. It's basically bottom 5 in the league. on the season, and over the last 5 weeks outside the top 20, below 79%, and they're still worse than league average in time shorthanded per game. And, with Quinn Hughes, I wrote about it this morning, like Quinn Hughes, if you just look at the impact on goals and shot quality on the power play, Quinn Hughes is probably the best power play defenseman in the NHL. And if he's not the best, he's top 3 for sure. So, like, this takes what is probably a mediocre Minnesota power play and makes it a pretty good power play. And this is a great power play spot for them, especially where the Wild are drawing, 3.1 power play opportunities per game over the last 5 weeks. It's the 8th highest rate in the league. I think this is a good power play spot in a situation where the top line is perfectly correlated and they're going to have to play a pile of minutes. Now, I usually don't play lines this expensive. But like I said, Washington has a bad penalty kill, and with Charlie Lindgren in net, it is night and day from having to face Logan Thompson. So I prefer Minnesota one over Pittsburgh. I prefer them over Toronto. I do not prefer them over a team we'll talk about in a second, but I think the Minnesota top line is firmly in play. And I know somebody in chat asked about ownership. Like, I do think the ownership comes up a bit on the Wild. Like right now, I think we have them at 12% total projected. But the thing is like there are 4 very good lines priced between 21 and 23K. There are a bunch of playable mid-price lines that we talked about already, whether you're talking about Columbus, whether you're talking about the Rangers, whether you're talking about Montreal or Detroit. So while I do think the ownership comes up, I don't think it's anything extreme. Like, I don't think we're going to sit down and check ownership later tonight and, Kirill Kaprizov comes in at like 21% or something like that. You know what I mean? Like that, I just don't think that's going to happen. Like, if they get close to double digits, I think that's the highest it'll push. I would expect somewhere more in between 5 and 10% and 10% plus, if that ownership does come up at all. Minnesota one, certainly the only thing I like on the Minnesota side. On the Washington side, I do think Washington 2 is kind of in play here. Like that Wilson Protas Sourdif line, 13,400. With Hughes and Faber probably going out a lot against Strome and Ovechkin, it leaves Wilson Protas and Sourdif to go out against those second and third defense pairs, to go out against Damon Hunt and Matt Kierstead and David Jiricek, and go out against Vladimir Tarasenko and Danila Yurov and Nicholas Aube-Kubel. Like, I do think it gives Washington 2 some pretty good matchups at 5-on-5. I have no interest in Washington 1 because I think they're going to run into Faber and Hughes, and that's just a brutal matchup for them. But Washington 2 at 13,400, 1.78 fantasy points per $1,000, which is perfectly acceptable, I think, for a stack on the road. Not much ownership, basically coming in between 1 and 3%. I think Washington 2 is very playable here. Might want to save them more for like 20 max or something, but as far as fillers go, I think they're in play. So for me, it goes Minnesota 1, Washington 2 in this game. All right, getting to our final 2 games. One of the big boys of the night. We have the Colorado Avalanche going into Seattle. Still don't know which goalies are going to be going for either side. I would say for Colorado, it doesn't really matter a whole lot. Whether it's Blackwood, whether it's Wedgwood. They have been rotating the last few games, so technically it would be Blackwood's turn if they do decide to keep rotating their goalies, but something to keep an eye out on. Here's the thing is that, I talked earlier about how Vancouver by power play goals against per game, probably the worst penalty killing team in the league. Right behind them is the Seattle Kraken. And by penalty kill percentage, the Seattle Kraken are the worst team in the league at 67.5%, which is just horrific, 66% over the last 5 weeks. Problem is like Colorado's power play hasn't been very good, which is why they keep trying different combinations. Like the last time Colorado played, like Valeri Nichushkin got some top power play time. Brock Nelson got some power play time. Obviously, they moved Gabriel Landeskog up a few games ago. So like this is a great power play matchup for Colorado, but they just haven't had a good power play. Now, I suspect that they'll figure it out at some point. You would hope they would, but they honestly really haven't so far. So I do like Colorado 1 because they can torch anybody at 5-on-5. And here's the issue with Seattle here tonight is last time out, they used the Chandler Stevenson line in a shutdown matchup. Chandler Stevenson and Capo Caco haven't played a lot together this season, a little over 40 minutes, but in their time together, 72 shot attempts against 4.2 expected goals against per 60 at 5-on-5. That's probably the matchup that Nathan MacKinnon is running into. That is brutal. The problem I honestly do have here is that Colorado has changed up their power play quite a bit, and I imagine they're going to keep doing so. Like it's fairly reasonable that only 2 out of the 3 guys on the Colorado top line are on the power play, and it might only be 1 out of 3. At some point, you might see MacKinnon with Nelson, Nichushkin, and Landeskog. That's a bit of a concern for me. So you're paying $22,600, the most expensive stack on the board, for a line that's going to have no more than 2 guys, maybe only even 1 guy on the top power play for a power play that hasn't been that good. Like that is a bit of a concern for me. Like I do love Nathan MacKinnon as a one-off. I believe he has the highest projection of any player on the board here tonight, so that is perfectly fine. Like Colorado too, I do think they're playable here just by themselves. 13,600, 1.85 projected fantasy points per thousand, which is perfectly acceptable. Landeskog, Nelson, and Nichushkin all between about 3 and 5% ownership, so not a ton of ownership on them. Might get 2 guys on, probably going to get 2 guys on the top power play unit. Maybe if they go 0 for 2 to start, you might end up with like all 3 at one point. I'm perfectly fine with playing Colorado 2 here. Like Colorado 1, if you go by top stacks, they have the second highest top stack on the board here tonight, behind Toronto. I do kind of worry about the power play correlation, but Colorado 1, obviously still one of the best lines on the board. I do think this is a spot where I'd be perfectly fine going down to Colorado 2. That Colorado second line with Nelson, Landeskog, and Nichushkin at 5-on-5 this year, 82 shot attempts, 3.9 expected goals per 60. Brock Nelson, 2 shots per game with 9 points in his last 10 games. So where you might get 2 out of the 3 guys on the top power play, I do kind of like Colorado too. Colorado has 2 playable lines here. I would certainly rather play Colorado than Toronto. Like if we're looking at the expensive top lines on the board here tonight. I do think I still prefer Edmonton in Minnesota to Toronto and Colorado though. So Colorado 2 is probably my favorite line on the Colorado side. It's my favorite line in this game. I don't really have any interest in Seattle. They have a very, very low total. The top line at 1.2 expected goals per 60 together. The second line at 2 expected goals per 60. This is not a good matchup against Colorado. Colorado has a very good penalty kill as well. So no real interest for Seattle. My interest is on the Colorado side. Obviously, Colorado 1 is one of the best lines on the slate, but there are a bunch of options over 20K that you can turn to instead. I do like Colorado 2, especially where you get 2 out of the 3 guys on the top power play unit. All right, final game. What a late night hammer this is. We have the Calgary Flames going into San Jose. San Jose. Now we're gonna have to do a few different line changes here. San Jose looks like they're going with a second line of Wenberg, Eklund, and Toffoli, top line of Celebrini, Chernyshov, and Colin Graf. Like Celebrini's playing with a call up and Colin Graf that against a Calgary team that's really good at 5-on-5, and the San Jose power play still not very good. So out on San Jose 1, San Jose 2 of Wenberg, Toffoli, and Eklund, 57 shot attempts, 2.2 expected goals per 60. Probably going to be perfectly correlated on the power play. That's something. San Jose does draw a lot of power play opportunities. They're at 3.8 per game, or 3.9 per game, over the last 5 weeks. It's the highest rate in the league. If you look at the full season, they're at 3.6 per game, also the highest rate in the league. Power play itself isn't very good, but they do get a lot of chances. I don't know. If you want to dip down to San Jose 2 or something, I think that's fine. I could see Celebrini being used all around the lineup here, because I don't imagine he's going to play, 20 minutes or whatever next to Colin Graf and Chernyshov. So not really in on San Jose. If anything, San Jose 2, but my interest is more on the Calgary side. I can't believe I'm saying it either. They are coming with a fair bit of ownership, which is one of the problems here. The Kadri line, Kadri, Sharangovich, Joel Farabee, 13,600, between 6 and 12% or 5 and 12% ownership. Yegor Sharangovich at 5% ownership. I was looking at how he's been faring lately. Like, he's been playing 16, 17 minutes a game. He's averaging over 2 shots per game in that span. The Kadri, Sharangovich, Farabee line, last 10 games, 69 shot attempts, 3.2 expected goals per 60. Coming in fairly chalky, but it's Kadri that's carrying the ownership. The other guys are like 5 to 7% at 13,600. I honestly don't care what San Jose line they're matched up against. They're both great matchups. I kind of like the Kadri line here. Kadri, Sharangovich, and Farabee. Obviously they're going to be a little bit chalky for their top 2 stack, considering it's Calgary on the road. But San Jose penalty kill, not very good. San Jose takes a lot of penalties. Kadri is on the top power play unit. Sharangovich, like I said, getting decent minutes and shooting a fair bit over his last 10 games. I kind of like the Kadri line here. I think they're my favorite line in this game. I prefer both Calgary lines over anything on the San Jose side. So it goes Calgary 2, Calgary 1. If you want to play San Jose in power play stack or something, I guess it's fine, but they have a low total, and I don't have any faith in the line staying together with Will Smith and Kurashev both injured. So in the power play, just not doing anything with John Klingberg running things. So I'm in on Calgary, not in on San Jose. Kadri line for me, I do think the Morgan Frost line coming in with about half the ownership is perfectly fine. But I prefer Kadri, Sharangovich, and Farabee here tonight. All right. Looking on the blue line, for the expensive defensemen starting at the top, there's a handful that we can go to. Cale Makar is the most expensive at 8,200, but it's Zach Werenski with the top projection. Zach Werenski also projected for nearly 30% ownership. I honestly don't care about defenseman ownership, especially if I'm just playing a one-off or something. If you have the salary for Werenski, play Werenski. If you want to, go to Cale Makar instead, I think that's fine. I think there's pretty solid value on Evan Bouchard as well in a solid matchup against Pittsburgh. So for me, it goes Werenski, Bouchard, Makar, Quinn Hughes, 7K. Washington, not a tremendous matchup, but again, with Charlie Lindgren, I do think it's a different story. And with half the blue line missing from Minnesota, Hughes and Faber are going to have to play a lot of minutes. So I really don't mind Quinn Hughes at 7K if you're not playing Minnesota 1. In the mid-price range, Jackson Lacombe again in a good matchup on the road against Columbus. I think Brandon Montour is fine for Seattle, provided that Vince Dunn doesn't play. I know Vince Dunn was sick, missed practice yesterday. I haven't been checking Twitter, so we'll mention that in the Discord. But if Dunn is out especially, I don't mind Montour. Rasmus Anderson, certainly for Calgary, I think is very playable at 5,700. Lots of shot blocking, lots of bonus shot taking bonuses for Rasmus Anderson, plus top power play time. Moritz Seider, obviously, very much in play for what is a good Detroit matchup. Under 5K, like Darnell Nurse, going back to him, I think is perfectly fine. Morgan Riley in a decent spot here for Toronto. Charlie McAvoy backing on the top power play for Boston. Going up against Utah, I think is playable. Jacob Trouba, his price has come up a little bit. 4,400 is probably a bit expensive, but certainly don't mind Trouba at his price. Though the thing is Jackson Lacombe's only $900 more expensive. I'd rather just go play Lacombe, but I think Trouba's fine. Under 4K, like Philip Hronik, with Quinn Hughes gone, like his value is going to take a bit of a hit, but he's going to have to play a ton of minutes. In Hronik's first game without Quinn Hughes in the lineup, he played 25 minutes against New Jersey. So Philip Hronik, if you're playing Vancouver or you want to get the PP1 guy in, Zeke Bouillon, I think is playable. But Philip Hronik, 3,400 for what's probably going to be 25 plus minutes, I think is my interest. Ivan Provorov's been getting a ton of minutes for Columbus. He's 3,800 in a very good matchup against Anaheim. Denton Mateychuk is on the same defense pairing as Zach Werenski. He's been playing 21 minutes. I think he's playable. Simon Edmondson, he's paired up with Moritz Seider. I think he's fine at 3,300 as well. Ben Sherratt is also projecting well for Detroit. So I do think the Red Wings have multiple playable defensemen here. Vladislav Gavrikov for the Rangers. Very good matchup at home. So I think he's certainly in play. Devin Taves for Colorado. Always say he's a fine pivot away from Makar if you don't want to pay it for Makar. Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Jan Kuznetsov for Detroit or for Toronto and Calgary respectively, I think are playable. But now we're getting to the under 3K part where I think things really do get a bit interesting because, again, Mike Matheson is out for Montreal. I do think Alex Carrier is probably going to have to play a lot more minutes here tonight. He's only 2,700. Sam Malinsky for Colorado is projecting well, so under 3K, he's fine. Mario Ferraro for San Jose. He's always in line for a block bonus facing Calgary, who does take their fair amount of shots. I don't mind Ferraro for 2,800. Alex Vlasic, with Levshunov out, I don't think there's a ton more minutes available, but Vlasic's only 2,800 in a decent matchup against Toronto. And, again, from Chicago, Matt Grzelcyk getting the top power play time. He's min-price. Even without Bedard, 2,500 for a power play one defenseman against the Leafs can certainly do a lot worse for a guy that's min-price. For goalies, for me at the top, it starts with Joseph Woll. He is 8,100 for Toronto at home against Chicago. Like, I get it. Without Connor Bedard, without Levshunov, it's one of those games that, like, it feels like Toronto should win, so they're gonna lose. But Toronto really should win this game. So, I do like Joseph Woll here tonight. Askarov starting for San Jose. Calgary, again, they do have trouble scoring, so I certainly don't mind Askarov at home for the Sharks at 8,100. Jeremy Swayman, he's at home against Utah. He's down at 7,800. He's projecting well here tonight also. So I don't mind Swayman. For the cheaper goalies like Dan Vladar on the road against Montreal, I do worry about shot volume, especially with Ristolainen back, but that's a very winnable game for the Flyers. So 7,500, if it's like 2 goals against on 22 shots or something like that, I think you're still fine for 7,500. Jet Greaves, if you really want to ride the lightning, so to speak, 7,600 at home against Anaheim. Anaheim does like to put up volume. Columbus does like to give up shots, but of course, those things can lead to a lot of goals against. Again, though, if he doesn't give up those goals, he could have a pretty big fantasy night. So don't mind Jet Greaves. Whoever starts for Calgary on the other side of that game, whether it's Wolf, whether it's Cooley, I think either are fine against San Jose. San Jose missing Will Smith. Power play still not very good, and the penalty kill is typically one of Calgary's biggest weaknesses. So if you need a cheap goalie, I think Wolf, Greaves, and Vladar are perfectly fine. All right. That'll do it. Hold on. New here. What do you mean when you say top line? Does that include defensemen as well? No, top line is just the top three forwards on the first line. So top line would be line one, second line would be line two, and so on. We do include defensemen in the stacks. Like, if you're playing Anaheim tonight, maybe you want to include Jackson Lacombe because he's the power play one defenseman. Or, if you're playing Columbus, maybe you add in Zach Werenski, or if you're playing Detroit, you add in Simon Edmondson because he's cheaper and plays on the top pair, but maybe more insider because he plays on the power play. But when you hear somebody say top line, they almost always just mean the forwards and not including the defenseman. But yeah, you can certainly, include a defenseman in a stack, make it a 4-man stack. That'll do it for us here today. Tentatively, we're going to have a show tomorrow, Wednesday. It's a 5-game slate. We'll see what the contests look like. But we should be here again. Good luck tonight, everybody in the Barn Burner. The hat trick pick for tonight. Go Rangers, go. We're going with Alexis Lafreniere. So Lafreniere is the hat trick pick. Good luck tonight, anybody taking part in the Barn Burner or whatever contest you're playing in. And probably see you tomorrow. And if not, definitely on Thursday. Good luck tonight, everyone.